Greenland is a really strange and interesting place. It's a huge landmass that is home to an absolutely tiny population with an equally small economy that is largely just dependent on fishing and support from its big brother Denmark. If this country didn't happen to be on a massive remote island, economically speaking, it wouldn't be much different from a small village. It has fewer people and produces less economic activity than a lot of zip codes in the USA. What's more is that unlike Iceland, another northern Atlantic country that it's often mistaken for, Greenland is wealthy but not exceptionally so, producing half the GDP per capita of Iceland despite the apparent similarities. Without a constant supply of funding from other, more established countries, Greenland wouldn't just struggle to maintain its economy, it would struggle to maintain its existence. People have inhabited this inhospitable land for thousands of years, but over the last 3 decades, those same people have realised that there are other options, and are moving to places with more opportunities and more than 12 hours of sunlight a year. Because of this, Greenland's future is uncertain at best. But that's not why much larger economies are interested in it. They are more interested in its potential. Of course, for better or worse, Greenland has recently been making headlines as it's found itself in the freedom crosshairs of the USA. The reason this is happening, and the reason it still gets so much foreign support, is because of its potential to be a major resource producer, its potential to be a major strategic outpost, its potential to be a trade hub along some of the fastest developing shipping lanes in the world, or maybe just its potential to secure a political legacy. Its unique spot in the geopolitical landscape can teach us a lot about the strange dynamics of our new global economy, and just as interesting as all of that is how this little economy actually functions domestically. Even outside of current issues, being this isolated presents some formidable challenges. So, how does Greenland's economy function? Why are global superpowers fighting over it? And finally, what does all of this mean for the future of this strange region? Once we have done all of that, we can put Greenland, one of the world's weirdest economies, on the Economics Explained leaderboard. You know, global conflicts aren't just fought on battlefields. They're won through strategy, diplomacy, and economic power. That's why, if you enjoy thinking about how nations manage resources, alliances, and conflicts on a global scale, Conflicts of Nations is a game you'll want to check out. In Conflicts of Nations, you take control of a real-world country in a modern geopolitical scenario. You'll navigate international relations, manage resources, and make strategic decisions in real time against up to 128 other players. You'll be making the same decisions that real military leaders do, researching new tech, deploying tanks, stealth bombers, and even nuclear submarines. Games unfold over weeks, making every choice, whether you invest in research, form alliances, or expand infrastructure, truly impactful. Also, you can play on PC or mobile with the same account, meaning you can control the battle whether you're at home or on the go. And here's something to give you a head start. By clicking the link in the description, you'll get an exclusive gift of up to 13,000 gold and a free month of premium subscription. But this exclusive offer is only available for the next 30 days, so don't miss out. If you're someone who loves thinking strategically about how nations operate on the global stage, Conflicts of Nations is a great way to test your skills. Click the link in the description, claim your free rewards, and start playing today. Okay, so to properly understand the economy of Greenland, the first step is understanding what Greenland even is. It is its own country, although it's part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a sovereign state which comprises Greenland, the Faroe Islands, and Denmark itself. This is similar in many ways to Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. Greenland has its own head of government, the Prime Minister or Premier of Greenland, but the Prime Minister of Denmark, currently Mette Frederiksen, is actually the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Denmark, so technically makes policy for all of these countries. People in Greenland get to vote for the Greenlandic Parliament, and they also get to vote for 2 representatives in the Danish Parliament, but Danish citizens from Denmark do not get to vote for Greenland's Parliament. Its people are given the option to choose a Danish passport or a Greenlandic passport, but for issues like citizenship and freedom of movement within the European Union, Greenland and its people are just considered Danish citizens. That's the technicalities. But before this turns into a CGP grey video about the oddities that come up when trying to combine a 4,500-year-old settlement with a centuries-old kingdom, decades-old representative government, and a 30-year-old supranational economic union, it's important to put aside the technicalities and focus on the practicalities. Greenland has a population of just 57,000 people and a total economic output of just $3.3 billion. Its largest city is effectively just a small village, and it's so remote and inhospitable that it's effectively impossible to build any modern advanced industry there that wouldn't be better suited back in mainland Europe or in the comparatively far more developed Iceland. Despite these challenges, Greenland is still a high-income country, although to be fair, it kind of cheats a little bit. Its biggest industry is government administration, primarily paid for with transfers coming from Denmark. Almost half of the tiny workforce is employed by some level of government, which even in a large, sprawling country would be excessive, but in a small, relatively simple place like Greenland, it's hard to argue that this isn't effectively just rebranded welfare. Denmark also supports Greenland by subsidising its private store chains to operate in the ultra-remote location, and Greenland Air operates routes that are also subsidised by the government to connect even more remote locations across the country that decided that a city with 25,000 people was just too much hustle and bustle. The Kingdom of Denmark also maintains control over foreign policy and defence, footing the bill for both of these functions. Now, again, this is similar to the UK, where England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales handle these issues collectively as well, although there is again the practical consideration that they all inhabit the same region, whereas Greenland doesn't even share the same continent. Now, the support given from Denmark proper to keep Greenland functioning is not so much charity as it is just regular governance. There are plenty of regions within most economies that absorb more government revenue than they produce in taxes. The only reason it seems unusual in the case of Greenland is that it's so remote and separate. The long-term vision is that this support will slowly be wound back as Greenland explores alternatives to maintain quality of life for its people as it becomes more independent of Denmark, or perhaps if some people get their way, totally independent. But that has been a slow process because again, practically, it's very hard for such a small, remote, barren country to build domestic industries that would afford them these high incomes. Unless... Alright. So, of course, the reason we're exploring Greenland is because of renewed US interest in claiming the country by apparently whatever means necessary. Now, so far, this kind of looks like the world's most powerful country wants to effectively seize the geopolitical equivalent of a dependent child that still relies on their parents for an allowance. It doesn't really sound like something worth compromising strategic relationships with an integral part of the EU and a fellow member of NATO. But, to be fair, there are a few things that they potentially see in this otherwise unremarkable economy, and the first one is resources. Greenland is a large, unexploited landmass that has a wealth of rare earth metals, precious metals, minerals like rubies, sapphires and diamonds, and the big bird's favourite, oil and natural gas. Now, there is a difference between these resources being there and them actually being useful. Despite having fairly well surveyed a series of sites with a wealth of natural resources, mining in Greenland just isn't really a thing. The only active mine currently in the entire country extracts a northesite, which is used for rock wool insulation, and is, at best, a small contribution to an already very small economy. The problem with all of this is that, yeah, the resources are there, but between the harsh climate, huge distances and small workforce, they are so hard to get to that extracting them profitably is a real challenge. Now, some of these issues could be overcome with infrastructure investment and fly-in mining workers. What's more is that a retreating of the ice sheet that covers most of the island is making it easier to get at a lot of these materials and to build out the transport infrastructure needed to get to them, which is good. Anyway, these endeavours have all got to be balanced out with an existing population that isn't going to be thrilled with their country becoming a remote mining outpost. But they are still trying to encourage foreign investment to realise these potential revenues. Another key interest is the country's strategic location right at the top of the world. As ice sheets have melted, new shipping lanes across the Arctic have become viable, often cutting thousands of miles out of journeys between major trading partners. Currently, Russia has been pushing to take advantage of this as the country, despite its vast landmass, has struggled with access to the world's oceans for trade or military projection. The USA clearly wants to both take advantage of these new trade routes and also have influence over them to protect their little corner of the world. Now, US military involvement in Greenland is not new. The Thule Air Force Base has existed there since the early 1950s, serving as an early detection station for missiles fired from the then Soviet Union, and also as a strategically positioned airfield. Today, it's actually run by the US Space Force, but effectively serves a similar function, at least as far as we know. The US doesn't directly pay rent or anything like that to keep the base there. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and the Kingdom of Denmark is part of NATO, so this was maintained under that agreement. However, in such a small economy, this base is not an insignificant factor. There are roughly 600 personnel there, more than 1% of the population, and it does provide contracting jobs to domestic businesses. The exact numbers are naturally not publicly available, but these kinds of bases are not cheap to operate, so it does work as an international service export. Now, even before the most recent interest in bringing the country under the wing of the Bald Eagle, this base has not been without its controversies. But even still, the US is likely going to be allowed to maintain this outpost for as long as they want, effectively giving them the strategic advantage of Greenland without any of the liability of Greenland. Now, nobody can predict the future, least of all economists, but it's highly unlikely that Greenland will become part of the USA anytime soon, and even less likely that it would be an economically productive move. Territory purchases do happen. The USA famously purchased Alaska from Russia, but that was a long time ago, and the practice has largely fallen out of favour around the world. The last territory purchase to happen was in 2017 for a completely uninhabited desert island between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and before that it was for a few border towns between West Germany and the Netherlands in 1963, so long ago that the purchasing country doesn't even exist anymore. Really, the only reasonable path is for Greenland and its people to become part of the US by popular demand. It's not impossible. Polls suggest that there is support for the idea, but they were unreliable at best. The country would need to become fully independent of Denmark, which, as we've explored, is not going to be easy for them to do, and then decide that after that, they want to put themselves back under the control of another offshore government. Okay, now it's time to put Greenland on the Economics Explained leaderboard. Starting as always with size, Greenland is a tiny economy. For all of the reasons we've explored in this video, developing any industry of scale is really difficult, and that's assuming they had the manpower to even work those industries if they were developed. The country itself is very large geographically, but in terms of economic activity, I wish there was a nice way to say this, but it's effectively a remote village. It's so small the IMF doesn't even produce figures for it, and the World Bank hasn't updated their numbers since 2021. But back then, it had a total nominal output of $3.3 billion, making it roughly comparable to Aruba, half the size of the Maldives, or about 9,000 times smaller than the USA. It gets a 1 out of 10. Now, to be fair, that tiny GDP is spread out over an even tinier population, which means that GDP per capita is still very healthy at $57,000, placing it between the Netherlands and Austria, two very high-income advanced economies. Now, a lot of that is dependent on support from the Kingdom of Denmark, and it must be recognised that Denmark proper has a GDP per capita $10,000 higher, but even still, it gets an 8 out of 10. Stability and confidence is fine. It's an advanced democratic country with support from another advanced democratic country, and unless it gets invaded, that's unlikely to change anytime soon. Now, it's still tiny, so it doesn't have many baskets to keep its eggs in terms of diversifying its economic base, and without overseas support, it would be in a lot of trouble, so it can only get a 7 out of 10. Growth has been slow but steady, boosted largely by a growing fishing industry and a bit more interest in tourism coming from people who want an adventurous destination. It's 30% larger than it was a decade ago, giving it a 5 out of 10. Finally, industry, and obviously this one is not great. Now, to be fair, it does have a diverse range of industries, so in some ways it's better than the petrostates, but their biggest employer is government administration, and one of their largest private employers is government-subsidised whaling. It can only get a 1 out of 10. Altogether, that gives Greenland an average score of 4.4 out of 10, putting it down here on the Economics Explained leaderboard. Thanks again to Conflict of Nations for sponsoring this video. Click on the link in the description to download the game and get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Now, we've made an entire video on the USA's last big territory purchase, Alaska, which is a potential insight into what a resource-rich Arctic US state could become, and you should be able to click that video on your screen now. Thanks for watching, mate. Bye.